Someone really important.
How's it sounding now?
I can hear it.
Oh no.
What about now? Is it okay now?
Yes.
It's good for me.
All right,
Okay.
it's okay for me too.
Oh my God.
Okay.
I think we did it. Okay. I'm so sorry for that bumpy start, everybody.
I'm so sorry. It was all my fault.
No, Lily says it's her fault, but we're not going to fault anyone tonight. Because tonight is a celebration of a wonderful book. Anyway, I'm going to read the author bios and then get out of here and then just watch and make sure nothing else happens. Okay. So I want to introduce y'all first to Lee Cole, who was born and grew up in rural Kentucky, and he is a recent graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, who now lives in New York. And Lily King is the author of 5 award-winning novels. Her most recent novel, Writers and Lovers, will be published on March 3rd, 2020. That is a while back. This might be an older bio. Didn't you just release 5 Tuesdays in Winter?
Yes.
Okay, that's her most recent novel. Don't listen to the bio.
A collection of short stories, but please.
Her 2014 novel Euphoria won the Kirkus Award, the New England Book Award, the Main Fiction Award, and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Award. Euphoria was named one of the 10 best books of 2014 by the New York Times Book Review. It was included in Time's top 10 fiction books of 2014, as well as on Amazon, NPR, Entertainment Weekly, Publishers Weekly, and Salon's Best Books of 2014. That is quite the resume.
Kind of old.
Yes, we should get that up here. All right, and with that, I will leave you guys to it. I hope you have a lovely, non-echoey conversation, and I hope our viewers enjoy.
Thank you so much. Hi, Lee.
Thank you. Hey, how's it going?
It's good.
Yeah. Thank you to Astoria Bookshop for hosting us. Yeah. And thank you to Lily for joining me in conversation. I really appreciate it. It's really an honor.
Oh, it's really, really my pleasure. I mean, I read this a year ago, almost a year ago, in a hotel room in New York. I had the galley that your editor sent me. You have a fabulous, fabulous editor. And it was a difficult time. No, it was more than a year ago. It was almost 2 years ago. Is that possible? Anyway, it was before I was vaccinated, and it was a year and a half ago, and we had to go to New York because my daughter was having a hard time, and we were kind of freaked out about leaving Maine and going to New York during COVID without vaccines, and I had this book, and it just got me through just a hard couple of days, and it's just so absorbing. It's so smart, so open emotionally, and so important to what is going on in our country. And so I just appreciate it on so many different levels. And it's really just an honor to get to talk to you about it. I have just a bazillion questions because it really is. It's just one of those very special books that comes along very rarely. So huge congratulations on it.
Thank you.
I guess. Oh, we're going to start with you reading. Will you read from the book at first?
Yeah, I was just going to read from the beginning for about 5 minutes or so, just the opening little section there. I've always had the same predicament. When I'm home in Kentucky, all I want is to leave. When I'm away, I'm homesick for a place that never was. This is what I told Alma the night we met. A grad student had thrown a party and we'd both gone. I don't know how long we'd been talking or how the conversation started, but I'd seen her watching me. That's why I went over. She was watching me like I might try to steal something from her. What does that mean, a place that never was, she said. All around us, people were talking in groups of 2s and 3s. It was a house way out in the country, decorated in the way you'd expect of a grad student, someone with an overdeveloped sense of irony and curation who also happens to be broke. Foreign film posters, a lamp made from antlers with a buckskin shade, those chili pepper Christmas lights. We were standing in the pink glow of a Wurlitzer jukebox. In her right hand, she held a solo cup and an unlit cigarette. Her long denim skirt was of the kind I associated with the Pentecostals. On the other side of the Wurlitzer stood a life-size cardboard cutout of Walt Whitman, the one where he's got his hat cocked and his fist on his hip. I kept catching sight of him in my periphery and thinking it was another person standing there, eavesdropping. I don't know what I'm talking about, I said. I'm a little drunk. I can tell, she said. She took a sip of her drink and slipped her bra strap back under her shoulder. She looked around for a moment, sort of bobbing her head to the music, which was not coming from the jukebox, but from some other mysterious source. People were dancing in an attention-seeking way. She let her eyes pass over them briefly, then she turned back to me and shook her hair. It was all tangled and cut short in a kind of bob, the sort of dark hair that seemed red in a certain light, the light from the Wurlitzer, for instance. I hail from Virginia myself, she said, putting on a phony accent. Do you ever feel a sense of suffocation when you think about it? Like you start to hyperventilate and sweat, and next thing you know, you're completely overcome with this fear that if you go home, you'll be trapped there and never be able to leave? The question seemed to amuse her. No, she said. Yeah, me neither, I said. She laughed at this. I grew up in D.C., basically, she said, so not the real Virginia. This is my first time in Kentucky. Just visiting? Something like that. It's not what I expected. Did you expect us all to play banjos and tie our pants with rope? She laughed again. No, she said, I just thought it'd be, I don't know. She gnawed on her lip and looked up at the ceiling, searching for the right word. Trashier? That isn't the way I put it. You go to the right places, you'll find that. Where I grew up is like that. And where is that? I grew up in Melbourne, I said, but it's not much more than a stop sign and a post office. And it's under-resourced? A flicker of memory. Every Halloween of my childhood, a round bale of hay was soaked in kerosene, lit on fire, and rolled downhill on Melbourne's main thoroughfare. People lined the street to watch as the bale jounced and tumbled, embers floating upward, bits of smoldering straw scattered in the road. I thought about this spectacle and how no one ever explained to me why it was done or for what purpose beyond entertainment and half-baked tradition. I remembered my dad's heavy hands on my shoulders and the heat from the flames on my cheeks, how you could see the glimmer reflected in everyone's eyes. And so, yes, in a town without a movie theater or a mall, where burning a bale of hay counted as entertainment, I thought it was safe to say that Melbourne was under-resourced. I say I'm from Paducah, I told her. It's the closest major town, if you can call it that. They sell these t-shirts that say Paducah, Kentucky, halfway between Possum Trot and Monkey's Eyebrow. Then there's a cartoon picture of a monkey and a possum hanging by their tails from separate trees, reaching out to each other, Sistine Chapel style. Wait, how is it between a monkey and a possum? Geographically, I said. Those are the names of towns, Possum Trot and Monkey's Eyebrow. No. Yes, that's amazing. I could think of another word. Well, she said, you're not there anymore. She raised her beer to me. I didn't have a drink at the moment, so I fist bumped the solo cup. She was closer to me than she needed to be, I thought. Close enough that I could see the faint hairs on her upper lip and feel the heat from her body and her breath. I couldn't place what it was about her that attracted me. Maybe some sense of shared understanding, real or imagined, that we were of a kind. Maybe it didn't matter. I figured these sorts of things suffered from close scrutiny anyhow. She was a pretty girl at a party who seemed to enjoy talking with me, and with whom I wanted to be close. Better to leave it at that. I probably feel differently about Virginia if I was born there, she said. Where were you born? She eyed me slyly for a moment, as if trying to discern whether I really cared. A country that no longer exists, she said. Is this a riddle? Her brows drew together almost imperceptibly. No, it's not a riddle, she said. She took a drink. There were teeth impressions on the lip of the solo cup where she'd been chewing on it. What happened to the country? I hope you find the right place, she said, not seeming to have heard my question. Maybe you'll know it when you see it, and you'll feel at home. Then she touched my arm and said, I'm going to the porch to smoke. It was nice to meet you. I gave her my name, and she gave me hers. Alma, she said. Shaking her hand was like putting a letter in a mailbox, not knowing if you'd ever get a reply. You dropped the envelope and shut the metal hatch, and then you were empty-handed. Before she walked away, she asked me what I did, if I was a graduate student or TA or what. I told her I was a writer, but maybe my speech was slurred. She looked at me like I'd meant to say I was something else. Thanks.
So good.
Thank you.
I love that opening very, very much.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, a lot of people, it's funny when you publish a book, people start defining it on their own without your input, and like in reviews and in intros and all these kinds of things. And oftentimes you're like, really, was Is that what it's about? I'm wondering, like, how, just to give the audience a sense, like, how do you describe the book, and what is important to you about it? You know, what is important to you to get across to people, to convey?
Yeah, well, I guess I say that it's a love story first and foremost, and that's sort of the vehicle for all these other issues of class and family and politics to kind of impinge on this relationship. Because they're sort of building their own bubble together almost, and there are all these other things that are kind of trying to find their way in. But the first line of the book is what came to me first. And so in some ways, it gave me a kind of roadmap, because everything that I wrote was sort of inflected by this initial kind of problem or emotional question that Owen is trying to resolve throughout the book, and that in some ways as a writer I was also trying to resolve in writing the book. And it's like that, having that question, having that predicament always there, was comforting or something. I could always rely on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I was just looking this over again, I said to my daughter, who's 22, I said, it's just such a good opening. And she said, why? And I said, well, he meets the girl on the third line, which, and it's true that, like, so that I love that relationship is just, a huge arc in the book, and such a strong thread throughout it. And also that you said that they're trying to create a bubble, but within their bubble, there's huge kind of political divides. They're seemingly whatever on the same side, but they're culturally 1,000 miles apart. And I wonder, did you know that right away about them?
Yeah. Well, I wanted them to be very different, and I wanted them to sort of, everybody likes a love story about two people from opposite sides of the track, as it were, I guess. And, I knew that I wanted them to be different, but when I was thinking about Alma, I didn't quite know what I wanted her backstory to be right away. That was something I kind of had to figure out as I was writing it, and as I was writing her as a character. But thematically, the book is in some ways about homesickness and displacement and not being able to return to your home. And I felt like it's hard to imagine a group that has a greater claim to those feelings than Bosnian refugees who came to the US in the mid-90s. And so that was one reason why I chose to give Alma that background. And then also 2016 was just a very dangerous and difficult time for Muslim immigrants. And for Alma, it wasn't just that election wasn't just political, it was personal. It was going to affect her personally. And so the stakes were very high for her, and the stakes were very high meeting Owen's family, who voted for Trump.
Yeah. I want to talk more about that relationship, but I guess, could you tell me the where you were, what the very first spark, you said that it was the first sentence. What brought that about, and what else did you see when you had that sentence? Did you see, kind of the trajectory of the story, or did you have to kind of feel your way to that?
Well, I had some notes and journal entries from when I was working as a tree trimmer. So people that I had met, and bits of dialogue and weird characters. I mean, it's a job that attracts a sort of weird it takes a weird person to want to sort of climb a tree with a chainsaw. You have to have a high tolerance for, it's just kind of a dangerous thing to do. But so I met a lot of interesting people in doing that. But then for that that first line, I mean, it was just kind of out of desperation. I was having a lot of writer's block, and the feedback that I had been getting in workshop for all of my stories was that there wasn't enough interiority for my characters. They weren't reacting.
Oh,
They weren't
interesting.
reacting internally to what was going on in the external world. And so part of working on this project was just me thinking like, damn it, I'm going to write a book and nobody's going to be able to say there's not enough interiority here. And so,
That's so
I
interesting.
really felt like I wanted to give Owen this kind of fundamental crisis or predicament or something, and that would sort of, that all of his emotions and everything that he's witnessing in the world would sort of be filtered through that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's really, really, really interesting, because you really succeeded there. And in fact, I want, after I've been hogging this book for a couple of days, try to, refresh my memory all about it, but I'm going to give it to my daughter tonight because, she's 22, and there aren't a lot of books that I don't know, have contemporary young men kind of revealing their emotions in that way. And it's just so, it's a very light touch, but it's just a beautiful, the way you're able to express how he's feeling in such beautiful language, but really very piercingly is I just think is really great for her and for everybody, to read.
Thank you.
I wondered about the divide in our country, and I wondered if you as it says in the flap, something about America coming apart at the seams, and America coming apart at the seams. And I'm wondering if you knew how much this kind of political, ethical, moral divide that's happening in our country, if you knew how much it, like every interaction, every relationship, it's there. It's just like bubbling, and yet again, just such a light, wonderful touch. It's not like you're beating us. You're not manufacturing these things. It's just, they come up so naturally, as it does for all of us in our interactions. And I wondered if you knew that was going to be a big theme. I mean, I have a lot of questions about that. Like, I also wonder if that's how you see it, that in America coming apart at the seams. And I'm also wondering, what do you think is at its root? But those are three questions. So.
Well, let me think where to begin. Well, I think for one thing, I remember being really dissatisfied with all of the sort of think pieces and commentary around 2016, because it was like everybody in cities sort of panicked and like, we have to figure out why did Trump win? How can we reduce this down to a crude, psychological explanation for why these people voted for him? And I think, all of those were sort of, dissatisfying to me. Like I wanted to write about real people whose lives aren't defined by who they voted for, and who contain multitudes and are complicated. And so that was one motivation. And as far as, I mean, it certainly felt like it was coming apart at the seams in 2016. Yeah. It's worth noting, too, that I wrote this before COVID and before January 6th. So I don't know how much, if there's optimism in the book, I don't know how much of it would have survived those events. But and then the third part of that was the source of the division, I guess, which is a lot harder to answer. But I don't know. I was thinking, I was reading this Walter Benjamin essay recently where he's talking about the difference between fascism and communism. And his explanation of fascism is that it gives people the ability to express themselves without actually changing the material conditions of their lives. And to me, that feels like what Trump was doing, that he was taking what was, a kind of righteous anger about stagnant wages and the outsourcing of labor and loss of opportunity in small towns, and channeling it toward the people, immigrants and Muslims and people who are least responsible for those problems, which is an old kind of fascist trope.
Right.
It's just sort of a cliche. But I don't know. I mean, I think the worst thing is just the way that he's undermined our sense of what's true and our faith in institutions and expertise, and that seems to have only gotten worse with COVID and in recent years. Unfortunately, I don't see that legacy going away anytime soon.
Yeah. Do you feel like, sometimes I feel like one of the roots, or one of the things that comes up with this divide, and also in your book, is just this concept of masculinity. I wonder if you thought of masculinity as a theme in this book. And I'm kind of thinking, like, generationally, you have a great span of men of different ages. You have Pops, and you have Rando, you have Kelly, you have Owen, and they all have kind of a different concept of masculinity, right? And I just wondered if you could talk about that for a second, because I don't know, I feel like I'm so in the land of feminism and the patriarchy, and I don't spend enough time talking about masculinity.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to capture, the character of the grandfather, Pop, is always watching Westerns, and he's watching these John Wayne movies. And I think that I saw those as kind of the embodiment of this mythologized past of, like, the strong man who can come in and save us, who can come into a little Western town and save it, from the marauders coming from the outside. And of course, that's a fantasy or an illusion. Wayne wasn't even John Wayne. I forget what his name was, Marion or something. Unlike someone like Jimmy Stewart, who actually went to World War II, John Wayne was here. He didn't go fight anywhere. He was just a pretend cowboy. And so that was something I was thinking a lot about, and that's certainly that version of masculinity is certainly very strong in American culture, and I think was something that Trump was tapping into in 2016, definitely.
Yeah. And it does seem like men, you can't really support a family anymore on a working class wage, and so there's this, I don't know, sort of loss of feeling like a man in the way that an American man is often defined,
Yeah, I mean, certainly none of all of Owen and James and Rando especially are kind of caught up in financial woes. I mean, Owen's got maxed out credit cards and is barely able to make rent, and and I mean, Rando, he's sober at least, but his life is still kind of a mess. I mean, he's smoking like 4 packs a day or whatever, and drinking a whole big giant thermos of coffee, and talking about conspiracy theories. So yeah, there's a lot of I don't know what it is, maybe just like a lack of nobility in work anymore or something. It's not like the romanticized, like, Bruce Springsteen song or something, although I guess those aren't always so romanticized either. But it's like my experiences with working these jobs to support my habit of writing, they've all been just sort of terrible. They've all just been really humiliating, and like, working at UPS, putting boxes onto a conveyor belt. It's like there's nothing noble about it. There's nothing to romanticize there. It's just kind of this job that they can't wait to give to a machine. As soon as they're able to allow to have a machine do it, they're going to do that. And in the meantime, they're going to resent you for being there and having to be paid. So yeah, I'm sure that has some effect on someone's pride, on their sense of self-worth and value, if they feel like the work that they're doing is thought of that way.
You have that, I think, amazing passage. I think it's on 98. I thought maybe it's kind of longish, but would you mind reading just a little bit? I love this passage so much because, it's basically the hipster, the contrast at this bar called the Schadenfreude, or Schadenfreude, or how you're supposed to pronounce it. Like maybe just from the paragraph that at the beginning of the page. I just love this, like sitting at the bar and then finish the paragraph. So good.
So you said this is on 98?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're talking about the man, kind of the guy wearing the day laborer's clothes.
Yeah.
Sitting at the bar, okay. Sitting at the bar, glancing around, I saw a few who did not fit the type. A frat boy in a pink polo shirt, a young overdressed attorney, a real estate agent perhaps, dancing clumsily. A vestige of Germantown's recent past sat in a shadowy corner booth. A haggard, befuddled-looking man in his middle 50s, wearing a day laborer's clothes and dirt-crusted lace-ups. You saw a man like this at a Germantown bar less and less, but now and then he cropped up. He'd be wearing more or less the same garb as the hip crowd, maybe a pinstripe mechanic shirt with Marlboros in the pocket, trucker hat tipped back. Only these would be the clothes he'd worn for years, unironically. It might be his actual name stitched in cursive on the shirt pocket, and the trucker hat would bear the logo of a business that was actually familiar to him, maybe even his place of work. The music on the turntable would have been released when he was actually alive, and the beer he drank, Hams or Pabst or Coors Banquet, would be the beer he'd always drunk. Do you want me to keep going?
I do.
Okay. This man would
Just
look
a couple more sentences
around him with an expression of total bewilderment, as if his life had been commandeered, or as if perhaps he'd been dislodged from the flow of time for decades and suddenly found himself in the future. As the dance floor filled up with androgynous girls and gawky boys in skinny jeans, this man in the booth drained his beer, shook his head wearily, and walked out into the night. I doubted if he'd ever come back.
I mean, that is so much better than any polemic in the New York Times to describe, like, that that tension, that kind of, the layering of two generations and the disconnect, the complete disconnect,
Yeah. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you're just so good at that. And fiction, when it's done well, it just can discuss these issues, I think, so much better and with so much more humanity and life and our ability to connect is really increased by it,
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that I guess I could have written something like that as an essay about, the way that gentrification is changing Germantown and Louisville, Kentucky, and how there are fewer and fewer working class bars and that sort of thing. But you're right that sometimes as a fiction writer, you just see an image that contains all of that. You just see this perfect juxtaposition and you have to take it. You have to just put that into writing somehow. And there were a lot of instances like that where you'd see guys that kind of seemed like, dislodged from time almost, that they'd sort of stumbled into this bar on a Saturday night when they're, playing LCD sound system or something. And, it's like, what is going on here? This is my bar where I play pool, on the weekdays.
Right.
So it has to be a strange experience, I would imagine.
Yeah. And do you feel like when you come across, descriptions like that or moments like that in while you're writing, first draft. Do you, people often ask me, they'll pick up something and they'll feel like it's very symbolic, and I won't have written it as, as kind of like an English teacher would, with this, the theme or the symbol involved, and then of course I could take credit for it afterwards. But at the time I was just trying to get in there, and make the scene come alive in any way I could. And I was not thinking thematically, or, and I'm wondering if that is the same for you, or if you're more cagey and just kind of more, I always say I write from the gut, and my later drafts are, from my brain. but I wonder if your gut and your brain are working together from the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think, or try not to think of too much about symbol or theme or anything like that in a first draft, because that's it just is a recipe for trouble, I think.
I do too.
Is it feels like I'm putting my thumb on the scale too much, if I'm trying to insert these overt symbols or something. But one thing about the South and about Kentucky maybe is, and I mentioned this sort of early on in the book, or Owen mentions this, that there's a way in which kind of text and subtext are collapsed, or the symbolic and the concrete are collapsed, so that he's noticing the stacks of the Mill Creek generating station over his grandfather's house, and they're sort of pouring their vapor into the sky. And or a good example is every time I drive from Louisville to Paducah, I pass Paradise, Kentucky, which is the subject of John Prine's song Paradise, about Mr. Peabody who rolled the town away on a coal train. And there's nothing there, but you see the coal-fired power plant in the distance and the sign that says Paradise, and it's just so sad and funny at the same time. And it's like the symbol is there. It's a literal sign, that you're sort of passing on the road. So for that, it's like you don't have to do any work. It's not like I have to think about some covert way of introducing symbols into the world. They're sort of already there concretely in the world, I think.
Yeah. And I love the way Owen comments on that. He can't just describe it. He knows that. He's self-conscious about describing it, because the smokestacks, because it does suddenly seem like such a symbol. And I think you do that really well. The fact that Owen is a writer, and he's taking notes. He goes to a party and comes home and takes notes, and that becomes a problem with Alma eventually. His writing from life, and then the Professor Tony is commenting on his work, and there's that great thing at the beginning about how please, dear God, don't let anybody ever write about a dead grandfather.
Right.
So they're kind of like these, I don't know, it's just it's again just so deftly done, not heavy-handed. I wondered if you struggled with that, making him a writer. I had that book, Writers and Lovers, and it was about a writer, and everyone's like, everybody knows you're not supposed to write a novel about a writer. And I wondered if you I didn't, of course, know that, and so I was happily oblivious, but maybe you did. And how are you thinking about Owen being a writer within the text and the whole meta issue? And
well, I heard that rule too, and people are always saying that to me.
Oh,
can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Oh, sorry, I was just reading the text. Okay. Yeah, I had people say that to me too. Like, nobody wants to read about a writer, and my thought was like, well, that can't be true, because I want to read about a writer. So somebody
exactly
must want to.
That's exactly what I said.
But was it hard to write about a writer? I mean, there's a way in which Owen he's having to learn to be a little more selective in what he describes. And, you know, he's he's learning about POV. He's learning about kind of not just cataloging every detail, but I did take some pleasure in sort of flagrantly disobeying the workshop rules, having him know the name of every tree, the species of every tree, because he's an arborist, or, we're not writing about a dead grandfather. I mean, it is true that when you teach undergrad, I've taught undergrads, and they do write a lot of stories about grandparents dying, but it's like, why not? I mean, it's a tragedy. Like it's a sad thing that they've experienced. Why shouldn't they be able to write about it? And so there was part of me that was like, maybe I can try to do that while at the same time sort of winking at the reader to let them know that I know it's a sort of trope, I guess.
Right.
And so that I make that move, I think, several times throughout the book.
Yeah. It's very amusing, when you do that. I'm wondering about influences. I read the really great New York Times review of your book, and he said at one point, and I kind of wondered how you felt about this, but he said that it was like that your writing was like Richard Russo and Ann Tyler via Sally Rooney. And I thought that was really interesting, because then I kind of wanted to do my own, and I would say Colm Toybeen and Marilyn Robinson via Lori Moore would be my thing. But I'm wondering, like, okay, so who do you feel like really gets your juices going? Whose book do you keep on your desk? Like who do you read? Who do you go to when you're feeling blocked or uninspired?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many. I mean, one writer that was really important to me is Bobby Ann Mason, who's a Western Kentucky writer. And she wrote 2 really great short story collections in the 80s that I love, and then a novel, In Country, which was made into a movie with Bruce Willis and shot in Western Kentucky, actually.
Oh, wow.
But her work is really great. And, she was writing about the South in the 80s, during this time when, the term Kmart realism is attached to her. It's this idea that it was this time when the agrarian South was sort of fading away and being replaced by Kmarts and strip malls and shopping malls and stuff like that. But what's interesting in her work is that all of that is still kind of a novelty, and by the time I started writing, it's become ubiquitous, But I was reading a lot of Lucia Berlin when I wrote this. I don't know if I can locate any way that reading her work specifically influenced this, but something about just her. She had such a strong sense of place wherever she was. She lived in a lot of different places, but wherever she was, she could see it so clearly, and she had such warmth for her characters and such generosity toward her characters, and I think I wanted to capture some of that too. And then, I read a lot of Carver when I was starting out, and I read a lot of short stories mostly, and I was mostly working on short stories when I was in grad school. And so a lot of my big influences have been short story writers.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then there's this moment when Owen tells Alma about he's talking about a time when he was working a lot of jobs and everything, and she said, "Oh, was that good? Did it give you a lot of inspiration for your writing?" And he's like, "No, I just made me feel like a failure." And I feel like as a aspiring writer, I went through so many years of feeling like a failure. I mostly waited tables, but I did a ton of other things too. And my sense of failure was so profound, and so gave me so much anxiety. And I wondered, and I think a sense of failure is something that we carry around as writers all the time. Like every time I start a book, or actually 2/3 of the way through, I feel very much like a failure.
Mhm.
And it's something that really, a feeling that I've really become very comfortable with, you know. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you want to describe your any sense of failure that you had, and then also I know people would love to know like how you published your first book. If people like to, you know, hear that story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I touched on this a little bit, just to the sense of like, you know, a lot of the jobs that I worked, it was hard to feel like they were valuable or that I was contributing anything meaningful. I mean, at least trimming trees is sort of dangerous or sort of interesting. You know, it's
Mm,
not commonplace maybe, but I worked in a restaurant too, and it's just like frying catfish, you know, for hours like that. Nobody wants to read about that, you know. But people would tell me, or like working at UPS, people would tell me, "Oh, you should write about this," and I would say, you know, well, I already have to live it. I don't want to go home and then relive it when I'm, you know, writing about it. But you know, I probably felt that way about tree trimming too, and maybe after a certain amount of time has passed, you can go back to it or something. Um, but
and then while you were writing this novel, did you have kind of just a looming sense of failure? Or did you feel like, okay, I think I, you know, this is going to be okay. Like you're like, it relieved your sense of, you know, I don't know.
well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like there's almost like a tipping point in a project where you realize that it's viable or something.
Mm,
Um, and for me anyway, and
mm,
it's like if I talk about it before that point, then it's dead.
mm.
You know,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not going
yeah.
to make it. But if I've gotten enough down, then I know it's like it's almost like sunk cost or something. I know there's too much for me to abandon it. You know, it's like it's there. I've written too many pages, so like however much of a mess
Hmm.
it is, I'm gonna have to do something with it. You know, but I mean, yeah, it's always a sense. I mean, okay, well, so when you're actually in it, I think you have to kind of hype yourself up a little bit, you know, and think like, oh, this is good, you know. But then it's like you go back
Uh-huh.
to it at the end of the day, and you're like, oh, this sucks. Like,
Yeah,
why did I think this was good? So there's always
yeah.
that sense of failure when you go back and look at what you wrote that morning when you were so hyped up and thought it was the
Mm,
best thing ever, you know. And but you kind of have to have those two modes. You have to be, you know, a cheerleader for yourself, but also your harshest critic when you're
mm-hmm,
revising. I think it's like
mm-hmm.
but it, you know, there's kind of whiplash between those two modes sometimes. And as far as the process for writing it and getting it published, I don't know. I had tried writing a novel that I put away that didn't succeed, and then I stuck around for a third year in Iowa, and I can remember my funding had been cut in the third year,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was taking kind of odd jobs. And I remember I took this kind of odd job cleaning Connie Brothers' swimming pool. Connie, who was like the administrator at Iowa, and so I was going out there every day, like cleaning her swimming pool. And I just remember feeling so like depressed and terrified. It was like, if I don't write a novel, I'm going to have to go back to this, you know. And
Mm,
have these nightmares where I was still working at UPS or something, and it's
mm-hmm.
like I can't do that. So it was just sort of out of desperation that I just started working on it. And you know, a lot of it I probably wrote, you know, 140,000 words, and it's down to maybe 100 and I can't remember, 118, something like that now. So I cut a lot. There was a lot of
Wow.
fat to trim.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, it took me about a year or so to write the first draft, and then a couple of years of, you know, revisions after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Oh.
Hi. Um, so yeah, I hope you don't mind, but I kind of postponed the question thing until 7:55, and if it's okay, we might run over a little bit.
Mm.
All right, we have 3 really wonderful questions actually, and the one with the most votes. How else did your time in writing workshops / grad school influence your work, whether positive or negative? That is from Andrew Ridker.
Hey, Andrew.
Mhm.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I feel like workshop can take you only so far before you start to get diminishing returns out of it, you know? So, it's important to kind of learn how to write a scene and to keep your characters in scene, to not pull back into summary, unnecessarily. And it's important to learn how to deploy sensory details and concrete details and stuff, and to get your technique down, I guess. But for me, I don't know, at a certain point, you start to hear the same advice over and over again, and you internalize it. And it's almost like the act of pressing send to your class or whatever. It's like you immediately realize all of the things that are wrong with the story because
That's so true.
you internalized it, and it's almost like you don't even need them to tell you. Like you already kind of know the feedback that you're going to get beforehand. So you learn to kind of anticipate that. But I don't know. On the other hand, though, I mean, it's been a while since I've had a workshop, but you always get something of value. Somebody always says something that surprises you and that you hadn't thought about. And I mean, the value of it is just that you have a lot of really smart people reading your work kind of skeptically, which forces you to make it as kind of unimpeachable, I guess, as possible.
I like that. Lily, do you have anything to add? I'd like to extend the questions to the conversation guests too, just because they tend to be more often about writing in general.
Yeah, I still have a writers group, so I'm always getting feedback.
Oh, wow.
And I think that there are certain comments, certain people that you really come to trust, and you just, when you get a good critique, it, when you hear something that you just know is true, you kind of learn what to listen to, and then just some reactions are just not, they're not going to mean anything to you. And I think part of it is just figuring out, being really open to everything, but figuring out what's useful to you and what's not.
Yeah. I wanted to make a distinction too. Like I make a distinction between workshop and having trusted readers, because having trusted readers is absolutely crucial. People that you can give the work to, and you trust what they're going to say. And that for me was one of the biggest values of going to Iowa, is that I met these really close friends who I know I can count on to read my work and be honest about it.
I went to I got my MFA at Syracuse in, I don't know, 891 or something like that, and I'm just reading a book by one of my very best friends there. It's just a novel that she's just finished, and it's so phenomenally good, and it's so exciting. I mean, there's nothing more thrilling than when a friend sends you a book that is just fantastic.
I know. Yeah.
Oh man, I need more writer friends. You guys are making me jealous.
You got to start a writers group.
Oh, I'm scared.
Don't be.
But this is about Lee. What other odd jobs have you had, and have any others inspired your writing in some way? That is from Jessica Dartnell.
Well, I think I've talked about a lot of them. I mean, I worked at a UPS warehouse at the airport in Louisville for almost 3 years, and that was just kind of unloading freight from airplanes. And worked as a tree trimmer for a little while. I worked in a kitchen as a line cook, which I I definitely lied on my resume and said I had experience cooking and had no experience whatsoever. But they let me give it a shot, and many, many steaks were sent back because they were not cooked properly. So it's kind of a miracle that they let me stay as long as they did. I worked at a tree nursery. I worked at a public library. I worked in the children's section of a public library, which was probably it was easier than the other jobs, but it had its own sort of pitfalls too. A lot of like weirdly unwieldy books, like cardboard books and giant picture books, and books that had been like gnawed on and had mysterious substances on them. So
Come to the Astoria bookshop, where none of our books have mysterious substances on them. All right, and this, we have another question, but a question from Emily McCann. What are you doing next?
Kind
of a loaded question.
I've become, I guess you mean like what project am I working on next, writing wise?
I assume.
Yeah, I mean, I've become really interested lately in doomsday preppers. So the project that I'm working on now is about a family in the 90s in Kentucky, wherein the father becomes more and more, goes further and further down the rabbit hole of doomsday prepping, and it kind of, things go awry, I guess, would be the way to put it. I have to imagine that COVID and the last couple of years have influenced that. I mean, I kind of started it as almost like a satirical thing, but then COVID happened, and I was like, oh, I can't do that. I have to take this a little more seriously. So.
Yeah, I am fascinated by doomsday preppers.
Yeah,
I watch a lot of videos of them on YouTube. All right. And someone named Brick asks, did you learn anything about yourself while writing this?
Hey, Brick. Did I learn anything about myself? Well, it's hard because I think that working on a project like this one, I kind of had this guidepost of, when I'm home in Kentucky, I want to leave, and when I'm away, I'm homesick. And maybe my goal in writing it was to sort of work towards some kind of resolution to that. But I don't think that a novel has to arrive at an answer necessarily. And it's probably not it's probably an insoluble thing anyway. I don't know that I can ever sort of get to that. But I think, one thing that I learned, I guess, I don't know if I learned it about myself, but just that I had to let go of some of the resentment I had about political stuff, and some of the anger I had about people that I was close to who were supporting Trump, and that I could still be angry about him and about what he was doing and the way he was manipulating people, but that I had to try to see beyond that, to see kind of people in their totality, to see how they were comprehensively, and that they were more complicated than their political beliefs, so I think that was something that I learned.
Yeah, I think that's something we all struggle with, to be honest. I have one last question from Jill. It's a bit of a sensitive topic, so you are allowed to opt out. But Jill asks, in reference to Ukraine specifically, how do you discipline yourself to write daily, as the troubles abroad are so heartbreaking and somewhat out of your personal control right now? In your book, Owen says about the danger of war and genocide and actual human cruelty, let's see, could cure your wanderlust, or seeing the worst could bring you to the conclusion that nothing mattered, and therefore you might as well be carefree and live as you wanted with total liberty. Thankfully. It ends with thankfully, so I just wanted to put that in there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could also sort of ask, that the question sort of applies to, writing during the pandemic, when there's this global sort of tragedy going on, and how do you manage that? I mean, I don't know. It's hard. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I mean, it is interesting because it's, I'm writing about in the book, I'm writing about a war in Eastern Europe, and history is repeating itself. And there's, another war in Eastern Europe, and people, being forced out of their homes, and many of them won't have a home to go back to. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is just being kind to yourself, and not being so hard on yourself if you miss a day of writing. During the pandemic especially, it was like, this global tragedy was going on. You can't be expected to, it's a completely novel, unprecedented thing. It's not like you should be hard on yourself for not being able to show up at the writing desk on those days, but yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. It's just, I don't know if I have a good answer. It's really hard.
I don't think every answer has to be a good answer. Just have to be honest. Lily, do you have any final input?
Well, I've hardly written really since the pandemic, and certainly not since the invasion of Ukraine. I get very disturbed by things going on in the world, and I do believe, though, that we have to write. I mean, it's important to do that. And you see from Lee's book, how important it is to write about these things that preoccupy us and disturb us, and seem to have no easy solution at all. And I think it's so important to write fiction about that.
Yeah, I agree. All right. With that, Lee, do you have any final notes, anything before I sign off? Other than buy the book, which you should.
No, just thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And thank you to Lily. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it too. It's such a privilege.
You guys were a pleasure to host, and you are always welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Don't forget, you can click the button right there and get your copy, and you can keep up with us at A Story Bookshop on Instagram or Twitter, and astorybookshop.com. Okay. Have a nice night.
Take care.
Bye.